Lack of planning and preparation leads to horrible conditions for the people. And that is currently what we're seeing throughout the East Coast right now with these bans and restrictions around forests and potential forest fires. We saw last week, as we discussed, Tim Houston banning people from even so much as hiking and walking in the forest. Then New Brunswick followed suit as well. Newfoundland, to a lesser degree, not so much as banning people from the woods. However, putting some serious laws down to keep people from burning in the forest right now, which honestly, that one I agree with. There's a lot going on, but additionally, there's a municipality in Nova Scotia that has gone so far as to, if you so much as water your garden bed, we will disconnect your water. That's nuts. And that is where we're currently at. Secondly, the BC Ferry story goes another direction, takes another turn that we weren't expecting, and it's making the provincial government look oh so bad because they continue to support China instead of supporting Canadian. This and so much more. Welcome to the Elevate Podcast. I'm your host, Josh. If you get any value from today's episode, take the time to like, share, and subscribe. Helps us grow, helps us get to new audiences, and helps people see there's a different option than what the mainstream media has to offer. Now, let's get into our first story, shall we? This town of Antigonish. I'm sorry this is cut off because of the poor design of the website and how my system is set up. This thing is cut off. I'll do my best to read you all of it, but I'm sorry that this partially will be cut off for you. However, town of Antigonish put out this notice last week. Kind of flew under the radar because of the Tim Houston announcement and everything that kind of was arisen from that. But they put this out to their constituents and put it out to their people. It says, effective August 6th, 6 a.m., the town of Antigonish has initiated a mandatory water conservation order to all town and fringe area water utility customers, which includes residential and commercial properties. Under this order, the following activities are banned to residents and businesses connected to the town's water system: watering of lawns, trees, shrubs, flower beds, and vegetable gardens, filling pools, washing down walkways, driveways, and washing vehicles. The town's bylaw enforcement officers will be enforcing these measures. Anyone found breaking these mandatory rules may be subjected to having their water service disconnected. The town's mandatory water conservation order will be in place until the James River Dam refills. The town thanks all residents and businesses in advance for their cooperation and for using our water resources in a responsible manner. Nova Scotia, it's crazy these days. So obviously you have these situations coming forward where you have towns outright banning the use of watering your garden beds, or they will disconnect your water service. You have provincial government banning people from walking in the forest, or they'll be subjected to a $25,000 fine. Goes back to what I said at the start of the episode. Lack of preparedness and lack of planning leads to horrible conditions for the people. Here in Nova Scotia, we're in drought conditions. That's the reality. The last time we saw rainfall was June 7th to June 8th. It's been close to 2 months. It has been 2 months since we saw rain. And it's leading to decisions like this needing to be made. It's unfortunate. But again, lack of preparedness and lack of readiness leads to horrible conditions for the people. The idea if you have a vegetable garden, if you have fruits, if you're looking to live off your property, well, if you're connected to the water system, to the city, well, you cannot do that. If you are so much as caught doing those things, they will disconnect your water. And that is legal in Nova Scotia. That is in their bylaws. They are allowed to do that. This is becoming very clear. Then you have the issues of, again, because of lack of rain, it is very, very dry in Nova Scotia these days. But instead of a fire ban being enough, we have to ban people from so much as going into the woods. We have to so much as ban people from even looking at the woods as they walk through it. And these stories have gained nationwide attention. Obviously, the right-wing side of the aisle saying this is an encroachment on freedoms. This is ridiculous. This is crazy. The left wing saying this is the best idea since sliced bread since we've seen. This is amazing. And Susan Holton, the Liberal premier in New Brunswick, thought, oh, this is such a great idea. We're going to do the same thing. And she announced her measures this past weekend. And honestly, what I'm seeing is people obviously are frustrated because they're still traumatized from what happened during COVID. And these are very COVID era-esque rules coming in that I said never would have happened if COVID had never happened. This is the issue, is the Canadian trust. The high trust society in Canada is eroding. People are, citing freedoms, this, that, the other. Fair enough. But I think at the crux of all this is the lack of trust between the government and the people that used to be very strong. Now it doesn't even exist. That's why people are frustrated. It used to be enough to say, hey, we have drought conditions. Please don't set a campfire up in the forest. If you do, there will be fines. And that fire ban was enough. People listened to it for the most part. But now we're at the point where we have to ban people from so much as hiking in the forest now. That wasn't the Canada I grew up in. That wasn't the Canada I knew and understood. The high trust society is evaporating. It's eroding at record rates. And people like Tim Houston and Susan Holt are complicit in these issues. As I said, it comes back to the trauma that Tim Houston and company felt during 2023 when our forest fires were very bad. He doesn't want to see that again. He doesn't want to deal with that again. However, the government doesn't even so much as trust their people. And that's what I'm seeing as the consistent theme as I watch social media. There's no trust among people anymore. And so the government has become so much more heavy-handed to make sure they ensure the proper, quote-unquote, results. It is fascinating. CEO of Shopify, Toby Lutka, said, True North strong and free, asterisk, except not allowed to go to the woods. It is interesting to see how far and how long Shopify stays in Canada. It is one of our most valuable companies and valuable export assets that we've had in this country. Very huge success tech story here. But they are getting increasingly frustrated with the government on all levels. And I'm curious how much longer they will last and how much longer it'll take before he moves everything across the border. We'll see. This story came up, which I thought was interesting. So we had Fred DeLorey, who has worked in the Conservative Party and strategy and comms, who now appears regularly on CBC, who is very much, and also lives in Nova Scotia, which I didn't know. He's been very much a huge proponent and cheering on Tim Houston's rules and regulations and thoughts he's putting forward. And then Roger Kushner took one of Fred DeLorey's thoughts supporting this issue and says this. And we'll just tell you that Roger Kushner is a Canadian senator for Nova Scotia, okay? Just putting that in context. He says, I was at a friend's place last night. His wife put a cigarette out in the fire pit before we went out, inside for dinner. 10 minutes later, we noticed the pit was in full blaze. Innocent enough, but incredibly dangerous. I support Premier Houston's call on this 100%. This is the issue I have with this. Is you have a Canadian senator who's openly admitted to one of his friends that he was with started a fire on their property. Whether it was intentional or not, doesn't matter. They were careless with their cigarette butt. They threw it in their fire pit. What could have happened? That was one of the last things that Tim Houston said in his address. Take care of your cigarette butts. Do you think a $25,000 fine is coming for these people? No. He openly admits that this is what they did. No. But people walking in a forest with no flames, no flint, nothing, are getting fined. This is the stuff that's really frustrating. This is the stuff that actually starts fires. And this is the stuff that actually causes property damage worth millions of dollars. Is carelessness like this, and this Canadian senator saw it, he admitted to seeing it, and his friend did it. No fine's coming. No fine is coming. As I said, I do not care. In this scenario, I do not care. I acknowledge the reality we are living in. I acknowledge how dry the conditions are. I acknowledge that it's a tough time right now. But walking in the forest is not a crime and shouldn't be a crime. Carelessly throwing out your cigarette butt, causing a flame, that's the issue I have. But no tickets coming for these people. Not a chance. Viva Fry had this to say, which I thought was very interesting, it was eye-opening. It says the same people telling Canadians not to travel to the USA because of tyranny, quote unquote, are now forbidding Canadians from going hiking, camping, and fishing on public lands. Let that sink in. And he's not wrong. It is fascinating, isn't it? Don't go to the USA for the American fascism, as Mr. Charlie Angus would say. American style, American fascism, gangster fascism. Yet we have premiers here who are openly saying, do not go into the forest or we'll fine you. And it comes down to lack of preparation. As I said, they did a whole study of what they could have done better in 2023. And the result they did is they hired more firefighting staff. They they looked to recruit more volunteer firefighters. But everything they did was reactionary. There's been no proactive measures like slow burns or controlled burns. There's been a lack of focus on cleaning our forest floors. Lack of forest management. But a lot of reactive measures have been invested in. And therein lies the problem. Lack of preparation leads to terrible conditions for the people. That's where I'll leave that for now. Myself and Reg will be jumping on this tonight to talk about the Atlantic Canadian response to all of this. Reg has some very interesting perspective that I think will be very valuable for all of us to hear and listen to, and him and I will be going back and forth on it. And join us at 9 p.m. Atlantic time, 8 p.m. Eastern to talk about all of that. It'll be fascinating. But for our last story of the day, Aaron Gunn and Dan Albus doing the Lord's work on this BC Ferry story in committee. Dan Albus put this out, which was very fascinating. He says, so it seems that C-SPAN wasn't the only Canadian shipyard critical of BC Ferries' bid process. August 1st letter from Davie Shipyard. It says BC Ferries has claimed a lack of interest from Canadian suppliers in bidding for this project. However, given that this was the largest non-governmental ship procurement in recent Canadian history, Davie was extremely interested and pre-qualified specifically for the Spirit-class ferries, the vessels central to this review. Unfortunately, the procurement criteria were heavily weighted toward the lowest price, effectively favoring Chinese shipyards. That was the argument, was we had no one wanting to bid. No Canadian company was interested. That's why we went with the Chinese one. It just made sense for us. We had to do it. But now we have two Canadian shipyards who've come forward and says, no, we were very interested. But the whole procurement process was set up to the lowest bidder. And considering you got a $1 billion loan from the government on this, you had some flexibility to work with. And I think it should be in the Canadian mentality that you put Canadian first. Why are you going across the Pacific to China? And this is exactly the issue of why our industry is getting absolutely smoked. First off, you have the carbon tax on industry, which is a huge issue for us, essentially is a tax on our industry, which makes us uncompetitive in the global market. But as well, this is what China's done to the West for the better part of the past 40 years. They produce their steel for super cheap, and by means super cheap, they essentially are subsidized by their government so they can go out and build on their own, and then they dump all the rest of their steel into the Western markets and undercut all of our industry here. And that's exactly what happened here. The BC government's like, all right, this is the cheapest price. We're just going to go for that. For a project like BC Ferries, you're buying 4 boats. I don't think the cheapest price should be the deciding factor. Just saying. Something that can last. Something that won't sink. Something that won't malfunction. Something that will have to last over 45, 50 years. And you decide we're going to go for the cheapest price. Even if that's what you want to do. And that's, and that is typical for government contracts in general. They'll go for the cheapest price. Go for the cheapest Canadian product. What are we doing here? And the fact they've lied every step of the way, trying to hide, shows you that it's always been elbows up. But as Jasmine Lane would say, it's always been elbows up for China. That's what it's always been about. We'll take the alcohol off the shelves of America, but we'll always favor China over Canada. And David Eby knows this, and David Eby 100% has been in talks with China. He's very favorable to China, and we all know this. It is very frustrating. Aaron Gunn, who also seconded this, said, wow, looks like a second Canadian shipyard expressed interest in the project. It increasingly appears BC Ferries deliberately structured the bidding process in a way that Canadian companies who had the capability to build the ships had no chance of being selected. And that is what we're seeing, baby. Elbows up for China. Elbows up for China. But anyways, those are the stories today. Join myself and Reg tonight on our live stream at 8 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Atlantic to talk about the latest what's going on in Atlantic Canada with these restrictions. We look forward to having you. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.